This is a film on general science. That is, science in general. It's a broad overview of all of the sciences, and there's a lot of them. So maybe one of the best starting places for us would be that word, science. Science comes from a Latin word that means knowledge. The word is scientia, and you can even see how our English word science developed from it. Science means knowledge. The Oxford English Dictionary says that one of the very first uses of that word science came from the Bible translator John Wycliffe almost 600 years ago. Wycliffe translated the Bible from Latin into English, and he used that word science because it means knowledge. For example, "And thou, child, shall be called a prophet of the highest, for thou shalt go before the face of the Lord to make ready his ways, to give science of salvation unto his people by the forgiveness of their sins." So, even today, science means knowledge, but knowledge that you get in a very specific way. Science is knowledge that you get by observing and measuring things. I should probably repeat that. Science is something that you carefully observe and measure. So the more carefully you can observe it and measure it, the more scientific it is. Thus, science is very much like this toolbox. This toolbox is hard, it's unbending, and real science is also hard and unbending. Only certain tools can go in the hard science toolbox. Stuff that you use to measure things, and weigh things, and closely observe things. Tools that time things accurately, and systematically measure things, and record things. Virtually any tool that you can use to systematically observe things, measure things, and write down the numbers belong in the hard science toolbox. Now, you can do science as long as it's observable and measurable and repeatable. Now, sometimes we say science when what we really mean is invention and technology. For example, someone might say, "It was science that got us to the moon." When actually it was engineers and technology that got us to the moon. It is an important difference, and we will look more at the differences between science and technology in an upcoming segment. So then, what exactly is science, so that we don't confuse it with a bunch of other things? Science is whatever you can discover using the tools in the hard science toolbox. Specifically, science must be observable, measurable, and repeatable. And then, and this is very important, you must be able to make predictions based on what you observed, measured, and repeated. That's why this happy little guy is kicking up his heels. He just made an accurate scientific prediction based on his observations, his measurements, and the fact that he could repeat his experiments. That's why the hard science toolbox is hard. If you make a prediction and it doesn't come true, you have to start all over again because something in your science went wrong. The ability to make accurate predictions is the key feature of real science. And what do we call people who use the tools in the hard science toolbox? 200 years ago, there was no word scientist. All they called them was philosophers. Really, that was it. Philosophers of nature, or natural philosopher. And it was this man, William Whewell, who coined a new word for natural philosopher only 150 years ago. Whewell wrote an article in this magazine discussing his ideas on what word should replace natural philosopher. He thought about nature peeper, but thought that sounded ridiculous. Then he thought nature poker, which didn't sound much better. Finally, he settled on scientist, which he didn't like either, but the name stuck. And for the first time in the history of the world, in this 1834 issue of the Quarterly Review, natural philosophers were called scientists. That's really not very long ago. Back then in the 1800s, nearly all science was done by unpaid amateurs, because really there was no money in doing science. But today, people spend money, and a lot of money, to go to universities and spend years of study to be officially recognized as a scientist. A university will grant you a PhD, which literally means Doctor of Philosophy. That degree is how most people get recognized as a scientist today. Science gives answers to small questions like how fast, or how big, or what is it made of? The answers to the really big questions are not found inside this toolbox. Questions like, is there a reason for me to exist? Is there such a thing as evil or good? Does God exist? What happens to me after I die? Expecting this observing and measuring toolbox to answer life's big questions is kind of like asking this tape measure to measure the beauty of a rose. It's just the wrong tool for the job. And when it comes to answering these big life questions, the world can easily be divided into two groups. Naturalism and Christianity. Naturalism believes that only the natural world exists. God is not necessary to explain anything. It is natureism. Christianity believes that the universe could only come about by the direct creation of a supernatural being, God. Both worldviews answer the big questions in very different ways. Naturalism is the belief in nature. And while there are religions that also believe that God created the world, Jesus Christ has distinctly Judeo-Christian beliefs, so whatever he believes is what we will teach here in general science. The Bible says that God created the universe. Naturalism says the universe was self-created. Here, God has a purpose for every life. Here, life has no ultimate purpose. On this side, good and evil are real things. With naturalism, good and evil do not really exist and are simply matters of opinion. The opinion of individuals, the opinion of individual societies. Here, you continue to live even after your body dies. Here, when you die, that's the end of you and your life forever. For the last 100 years or so, naturalism has been the dominant opinion and sometimes the only opinion allowed in universities, colleges, and public schools. And naturalism is the dominant opinion you will hear in movies and television and magazines. And the debate between these two is not often called naturalism versus Christianity. It's often called science versus Christianity, or science versus religion. But this is confusing. It makes it look as if naturalism is science, as if they're one and the same. But they are not one and the same. Science is only a tool to observe and to measure the natural world. Naturalists can use the toolbox, Christians can use the toolbox, anybody can use the toolbox. But these are worldviews dealing with the big ideas of life, of purpose, of good and evil, and of justice. In fact, the tools of science really don't belong on a pedestal at all. Much better. Science is a tool, and tools are much better suited sitting on a workbench or on an apple crate, especially since Isaac Newton, the father of physics, is associated with apples. So, to summarize, these tools do not help us answer the big questions of life. Rather, the tools of science are made to answer important but smaller things, like observing and measuring the universe. It's never been easy to do real science, because science has to be reproducible. In fact, one of the world's most respected science magazines, Lancet, recently reported that nearly 1/2 of all published science articles cannot be reproduced. Now, wait a minute, you might ask. How is that possible, that nearly 1/2 of published science articles aren't scientific? The article asked scientists in all fields if they could reproduce certain well-known and important scientific studies. 70% said they tried and failed to reproduce the experiments, and half of them actually failed to reproduce their own experiment. The article goes on to cite many examples as to why so much so-called science is actually non-reproducible. People tend to pick and choose what they want to report. Also, there is tremendous peer pressure to get something published. Sometimes there is not enough oversight. Sometimes it comes from poorly done experiments. Sometimes there is even fraud. And sometimes, they said, it's just plain bad luck. For science to be science, it needs to be observable, measurable, repeatable, and you need to be able to make predictions. In General Science 101, we want to cover all of the sciences, and fortunately, there are 4 generally recognized categories of science: natural science, social science, formal science, and applied science. When I think of those 4 broad categories and all the sciences that fit within them, it makes me think of all the different rooms and unique locations you find inside of one of these beautiful, multi-roomed mansions. The rooms inside of a mansion are all somewhat interconnected, but each room has its unique look, its unique function and decorations that makes each room special and different. And the sciences are like that. The sciences are all somewhat interconnected, but each science has a different focus and different function and unique things that makes each of the sciences interesting to study. The world of the sciences are like rooms in a mansion. Now, apparently, I am not alone in thinking that the world is a big house with lots of interesting rooms. Listen to what the New Testament book of Hebrews says. The builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself, for every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. God is the builder. The universe is a house or a mansion. The universe, according to the New Testament, is like a great mansion. And when Jesus is talking about what heaven itself is like, he compares heaven to a great mansion with many rooms inside. So it seems to be a natural. The mansion of general science. And to see all the rooms of the mansion, we will need a tour of the mansion. And I will be your tour guide. Let's talk about those tours. First, we will tour the rooms that correspond to all the natural sciences. The natural sciences are sometimes called the hard sciences, not necessarily because they are difficult, though many of them can be, but hard as in rigid and inflexible, like iron, because the natural sciences use lots of hard numbers and hard measurements. Natural science divides into two areas, physical science and life science. Physical science deals with non-living systems and will cover physics, chemistry, astronomy, and earth science. And earth science divides into land, water, and air, or geology, oceanography, and our atmosphere. And the life sciences, also called biology, of course deals with living things, humans, animals, and plants. But we will focus mostly on a tour of human biology. Each of the natural sciences will be assigned a particular room or area in the mansion. The next major area of sciences are collectively called the social sciences. The social sciences are sometimes called the soft sciences because they use a different kind of toolbox. If the natural science toolbox is made of something hard and rigid because it is so exacting, then the soft science toolbox is made of something much softer. The social sciences are called the soft sciences mostly because they deal with people. And people are softer than the natural world. They are very complex, difficult to predict, and put hard numbers to, thus the soft sciences. As a result, the tools are different than the hard sciences. Here, we find tools like opinion polls and surveys, questionnaires, historical eyewitness reports, and interviews. The social sciences explore the areas of psychology and sociology, economics, political science, and the large and fascinating science called the humanities. And finally, we will tour the mansion areas corresponding to formal science and applied science. We will begin with the natural sciences and start with physics.